Hello and welcome everyone to this cinematic tutorial series. I'm Sporsho from Dressrosa Studios, and today I'll be showing you guys how you can make this environment from scratch using Unreal Engine. So let's get started. So to get started, we're going to need to create a level. I'm just going to right click and select levels from here. Just going to call it L_alien world. Let's open this up. Okay, after opening this up, we're going to do a basic atmosphere. So in order to do that, I'm just going to click on my place actors, then bring in the place actors panel and go over to the lights, just bringing in a directional light, skylight, and then I'm just going to head over to visual effects. I'm just going to bring in a sky atmosphere and then a exponential height fall. And with that out of the way, I think that's it for our basic atmosphere. Another thing that you guys can do is you can use the Environmental Light Mixer to do all of this, and you don't need to click on the place actors panel every time and find everything. So I'm just going to show this to you guys. I'm just going to delete everything and click on window and then click on the Environmental Light Mixer. After opening this up, you're going to see that there are a few options over here. First thing is create skylight, then create atmospheric light, then create sky atmosphere, then create volumetric cloud, and then there is create height fall. So let's click on each of these and see what it does. So if I click on create skylight, it's just going to bring in a skylight component, and then if I click on create atmospheric light, it's just going to bring in a directional light over here. And if I click on sky atmosphere, this is just going to bring in a sky atmosphere. Then if I click on volumetric cloud, this is going to give you a volumetric cloud, and then height fall is just going to bring you a exponential height fall. Alright, and this is how you guys can use the Environmental Light Mixer to bring in all of the components with just one click. And if you go over to your Environmental Light Mixer again, you're going to see you have all of your settings nicely packed inside of here. And another cool thing about this is, if you look over here, there is something called minimal, normal, and normal plus advanced. So what the minimal does is it's just going to give you all of the minimal settings that you can use to modify your scene. And if you're an advanced user, you can go and click on normal plus advanced, and then you can get all of your controls. So yeah, this is how you can really outbreak your scene. This gives you a whole control board, everything together, so you don't need to click on this, this, and this over and over again. So yeah, a really neat thing to remember. Alright, after setting up all lighting, we're going to need a landscape. For our landscape, we're just going to use a height map. I'm just going to click on landscape, and you guys can see there's an option to create new, and there's an option to import from file. So I'm just going to choose that because I'm going to be importing a height map data. So in the height map file, I'm just going to click on here to browse. Since I already have one, I'm just going to use this. And if you guys want to generate your own height maps, there's a website that you guys can use to get real world data from Google Earth images. It's called Tangram. I'm just going to give you the link in the description so you guys can try it out for yourself. So in my case, I can see that the elevation on the ground is way too much, and I want to reduce this. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to the scale and change the scale to somewhere around 15. Just keep in mind, this might vary for you. You don't have to put in 15, and this actually depends on whatever type of height map that you brought in. So if you brought in a height map that is flatter, then you don't need to do the scaling. So yeah, I'm just going to click on import. Keep in mind this might take a bit of time depending on the resolution that you brought in. So also another thing to remember is whenever you bring in a height map, the resolution of the height map is going to be the resolution for your landscape. So if I go over here and open up this height map that I brought in, so you're going to notice 7704 by 7704. So this means our landscape is going to be 7704 by 7704 meters. So this resolution directly corresponds to the size of your map. Just keep that in mind. Also, if you guys want to see how to generate height maps from Tangram, I already have a tutorial on that, so you guys can check that out. So with that out of the way, if I zoom out, you guys can see that the height map actually did a great job in bringing in a realistic looking landscape. So yeah, we don't have to play around with the landscape tools as much. So now our landscape is pretty much empty. We need to assign a material to this. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new folder for the material. I'm just going to call this landscape underscore materials. Open this up and just right click and click on material, and I'm just going to call this m underscore landscape master. Now after opening this up, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to head over to my details panel and check the use material attributes. You're going to notice that all of our functionalities are gone from here. So to fix that, I'm just going to look for something called make material attributes, get this, and bring this in. So you can see we get all of our functionalities back. So I'm just going to connect this to my material attributes just like so. So with that out of the way, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold down T and left click to bring in a texture sample, and then I'm just going to convert this to a parameter and call this albedo. Okay, after doing that, I'm just going to connect this to my base color. Okay, so you're going to notice that this throws up an error because we don't have anything for the texture yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a white placeholder. Alright, after setting that up, you're going to notice that the error is gone. So after doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this just like so and call this roughness underscore map, and then I'm just going to connect this to my roughness, and I'm just going to copy this again and call this normal map. Alright, so after doing that, I'm just going to select a normal placeholder for this, and then I'm just going to connect this to my normal. So with that out of the way, we're going to need something called landscape layer coordinates in order for this material to work properly. So I'm just going to look for landscape layer chords. So this is it. So I'm just going to connect this to my UVs and then hit save. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click on here and make a material instance for this. Alright, now I can hit save. Now if I select my landscape and scroll down, you're going to see there is a landscape material slot. So I have my material instance highlighted, and then I'm just going to click on this button, and now our material instance is applied. So You can see this is just white, but we want textures for this. So if I double click and open my instance, you're going to see I have options to change my texture. So first thing, I'm just going to enable all of my texture options, and for the textures I already brought in a few from Quixel Megascans. So what you guys can do is just click on this window button over here and open up the Quixel bridge, and from here go to surfaces and you can search for sand, and from here you can choose any of this that works best for your project. Alright, now with that out of the way, I'm just going to select my albedo and pop it in here, and then my normal, and then after that I have something called a ORD map. So what's a ORD map? So if I open this up, you're going to notice that you have 3 channels highlighted over here: red, green and blue. So if I disable the green and blue, you're going to see what's in the red channel, and if I disable the red and enable the green, you're going to see there is a pattern in the green channel, and in the blue channel there's also a pattern. So if I go over to the name again, you're going to see this is called ORD. So O stands for occlusion, R stands for roughness, and D stands for displacement, and these all correspond to red, green and blue. So red is for occlusion, green is for roughness, and blue is for displacement. So in our case, we have a roughness map in our green channel. So if we go back to our material, we can see we have connected our roughness map to our RGB, and it's not connected to our green channel. So in order to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in a component mask, and I'm just going to convert this to a parameter. I'm just going to call this roughness RGB comp mask. The reason behind doing this is in some cases you might have the roughness in the red channel, or you might have the roughness in the blue channel, and if I'm creating a master material, the master material should account for those changes. So if I have this component mask parameter, and if I have this connected to my RGB and pass this through the roughness and then hit save, you're going to see this option pops up over here. If I enable this, you're going to see I have an option to enable and disable the red, green and blue channels. So this makes it more versatile if you have different kinds of textures. So in my case, I only want the green channel to be enabled, so I'm just going to disable the red, and this should do the job. So if I go down and look at my landscape, you're going to see that there are repeating patterns all over the landscape. And we also need to figure out that if our scale for the texture is okay. So in order to find out if the scale is okay or not, we're going to search for a mannequin. I'm just going to bring in a static mesh for the mani, just like so, and look at the texture. I mean, to me this looks okay, but this could be just a little bit bigger. But this is completely up to you if you want to make this bigger or not. So in order to fix the scale, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to head over to my landscape material and open this up. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold down M and left click to bring in a multiply. After bringing this in, I want to disconnect all of my connections to the UVs. So I'm just going to hold down Alt and left click on here, and this should disconnect all the pins. And after that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to connect my landscape layer coordinates to my A, and this multiply to all the UVs. And now to adjust the size, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in a scalar parameter. I'm just going to hold down S and left click. This should bring a scalar parameter. I'm just going to call this size, and I'm just going to give this a default value of 1 and hit save. So now if I go back to my material instance, you're going to notice there is an option to change the size over here. So if I increase the size, you're going to notice that the texture gets smaller and smaller. And if I decrease it, you're going to notice that our texture becomes bigger and bigger. So you might ask that why is our texture size increasing when I decrease the size value, and it's shrinking when I increase the size value. So if I go over to my landscape master material, you're going to see that I'm doing the calculation with the multiply. So this is why when I increase the value of the size, the texture size decreases, and you ultimately get a texture which has a larger scale. So if you want this the other way around, what you can use is a divide. So if I hold down D and left click, this is going to bring in a divide node. So if I connect my landscape layer coordinates and my scalar parameters to the A and B, just like so, and disconnect everything from my multiply, if I connect this just like so and hit save, and if I go back to my landscape material instance, I'm going to see that if I increase the size, you're going to notice that my texture gets bigger and bigger, and if I decrease this, you're going to notice that it scales down. So this is completely up to you. However you want to do this, you can use a divide or you can use a multiply. And now to fix this repeating pattern, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in some macro variations. So if I go over to my landscape material and open up the content browser from here, I can search for gold, and you're going to find this gold material in your content browser as well if you have the starter content installed. So if you don't have the starter content installed, what you can do is just click on add here and click on add feature or content pack, and from here select content and then select the starter content, and you can click on add to project, and this is going to add the starter content pack to your project. And then if you search for gold in your content browser, you should see this material pop up. So now if I open this, you're going to see something called macro texture variation. So what we're going to want to do is select all of this with these two multiplies and just copy all of them to our material over here. Okay, after bringing that in, we're going to want to use this with our albedo. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold on M and left click to bring in a multiply, and then I'm just going to connect this to my A and connect my albedo to the B of the multiply, then bring this in over here and connect this to my base color. And you can already see this is adding some black splotches to my material. So if I hit save, so if I go over to my landscape, you're going to see this actually broke up those nasty patterns and added these black splotches. So you might not like the scale of this pattern over here. So in order to change that, we're going to head over to our material again, and you're going to see there's a option to change the size over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in a scalar parameter and call this call this macro score 1, and then copy this again, rename this macro 2, and then rename this to macro 3. So this is because we have 3 textures over here, and these are all controlled individually, and you want to control each of them individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy over the default values from over here and paste this, and then connect this to the B. Same thing here, and for this one as well. So as these parameters are controlling the sizes, I think I should name them accordingly. I'm just going to rename them and just add size in the beginning. So if I head on over to my material instance, I'm going to see this added the size controls for the macro variation. So if I enable this and change the size over here, you're going to notice that this is going to change a layer of the splotches. So if you look closely, this is changing up this layer, these smaller patterns over here. So if you want to make them larger, you can do so by doing this. So if I go up from here and choose a really small value, you're going to really notice the changes. So something like this, you're going to notice that this increased the size of the macro variation texture. So if I do something like 1, this is obviously going to make the texture size smaller. And if you want to change the bigger splotches, you can head over to the size macro 3 and play around with this to change the size of the larger splotches. So you can already see, if I put a larger value over here, the size of the splotches got a lot smaller. So just remember to change this, like, very slightly. Yeah, something like this. And you might find this macro variation slider to be a pain in the butt to change every time, because this is working in such a small range, and if you move the slider, this is very hard to control this precisely. So when working with smaller values, I recommend you use a divide. I'll show you what I mean. So if you go over to your landscape master material, and over here you see your size macro 3 over here, what I'm going to do is just hold down D to bring in a divide, and then I'm just going to connect my A to this and my output to my multiply. And in my divide, I want to divide this value by 100. So if I divide my value to 100, I should change this default value to 0.2. So now if I go back to my instance and change my value from here, you're going to notice that we can use larger values and it is way easier to control. And if you want to make this even easier, you can go with a divide of 1000 as well. So in order to do that, I'm just going to put a default value of 2 over here and hit save, and then go over to my instance. I'm just going to change this to my default value over here. And now if I increase this like this is way easier to control this more granularly. So yeah, this is how you can use device to control the parameters precisely. So in my case, the default value for the size works perfectly. So I'm just going to revert all of this from here. So even after adding all those variations, you're going to notice that our texture looks very flat and boring. So in order to make this a little bit more interesting, what we can do is we can use a blend of 2 textures to make our landscape look more interesting. So if I head on over to my landscape master material, what I can do is I can bring in a linear interpolate node. So if I hold down L and left click, this is going to bring in a linear interpolate. So in short, this is called Lerp. So you can see there is a input for A, and there's input for B, and there's input for alpha. So what the Lerp node does is this takes in a alpha texture, and a alpha texture consists of a black and white texture. So to demonstrate this, I'm just going to look for a Perlin noise texture over here and bring this in. And then I'm just going to connect my RGB to my alpha. So after connecting that, if I select my Lerp and right click, I'm going to see that there is option to preview the node. So if I click on this, you're going to see that this alpha map shows up here. So this might be a little bit hard for you guys to understand because we're just sampling this texture to the alpha, and this is just giving us the same black and white result. So if I hold down 3 to bring in a vector 3 constant and connect this to my A, and if I bring another one and connect this to my B, and I want to give this A a color, let's say red, and the B, let's say blue. Yeah, something just like this. So you're going to notice that if I open up my texture, compare this with the Lerp that is going on, you guys are going to notice that it is the same pattern over here, but we can now use colors to differentiate from the black and the whites. And you guys can also see there is a little bit of blending going on. So the parts that are not completely white and not completely black, I mean the gray areas, are just going to be a blend between the both colors that you have. And we can use this to our advantage. We can use multiple textures with this Lerp and get a nice blend between them. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of my colors, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this albedo just like that and call this albedo underscore 2. So now if I connect my first albedo to A and the second one to the B, and then connect my Lerp to my multiply like this, just going to reorganize things just like this. So now what I can do is I can use a blend between multiple textures. So if I hit save, now if I go over to my instance, you're going to see our material has been covered with this white texture. You can see this here as well. So this is because we haven't added a texture in our albedo. So I'm just going to enable this, and I'm just going to go over to my Quixel bridge and go to surfaces and search for sand again, and I can use any of these textures. So after downloading it, I'm just going to import this texture. So after importing, if I select my texture and replace this, you're going to notice that we have a variation between two textures. If I go closer to this, you're going to notice that. So now we want to change the size of our texture, so let's add that functionality. So if I go over here and move this just like so, and bring in another divide just like that, and connect this to the A, and I'm just going to copy the size and rename this. Let's call this size B, and let's rename this to size A. And now I'm just going to hook this up just like so, and I'm just going to connect this to my albedo 2. So if I hit save, So you're going to notice there is an option to change the size B. So if I enable this and move the slider, you're going to see that our texture size gets smaller if I increase this. So if I enable this and change the slider, this is going to increase or decrease the size of our texture. You can notice these pebbles are getting larger and smaller depending on what size I have. So yeah, you can play around with this. So for now, I'm just going to keep it as something like this. And also, if you notice that our texture blending pattern, also one thing to mention that is you can see the blend between both of our texture, and the blending is happening in a very small area. So in order to change the size of the blend, so in order to add that functionality, we're going to head on over to our landscape material. And in here, you guys can see that our powering noise texture has a UV channel of its own. So we can use that to change the size of our texture. I'm just going to hold down U to bring in a texture coordinate. And then I'm going to hold down M and left click to bring in a multiply. And I'm just going to connect this to the A. And for the size, I'm just going to copy this scalar parameter and connect this to the B. And I'm just going to rename this and call this size alpha. And I'm just going to connect this to my UV channel. So if I hit save, now if I go back to my material instance and enable this size alpha, and if I slide this, you're going to notice that the pattern for this is changing. This is getting smaller in size, like just like so. And for this, I'm just going to keep my blending at 0.1, just like so. And the thing that we did for the albedo, we can do the same thing for the roughness map and the normal map as well. So I'm just going to quickly do that. So after all that is done, I'm just going to enable my normal and my roughness map too, and replace this just like so. Now you're going to notice that our roughness and our normal is working properly. And now one important thing to mention is you can see that our colors are not matching. So in order to fix that, what we can do is we can go over to our material and then we can add a tint. So for the albedo one, I'm just going to hold down 3 to bring in a vector 3 constant, and I'm just going to convert this to a parameter and just call this tint underscore 1 and grab a multiply just like so, and connect this to the A, connect this to the B, and then I'm just going to connect this to the lerp just like so. And I'm just going to do the same thing for the second texture as well. So I'm just going to rename this to tint 2, and I'm just going to connect this to the B and just like this. Now you're going to notice that our material is all black. This is because our tint is set to a black default value. So in order to fix that, the default value should be set to white. Put this as well. And now if I hit save, you're going to notice that we have our tint options over here. Now I want to make these two textures blend even better. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the tint just like so. So now you can see that our material graph looks a bit messy. So let's just fix that so it's easier for us to work with. So I'm just going to select all of this and I'm just going to right click and click on collapse nodes. So this is going to create a node that contains all of our functions, just like so. So if I go back to my material graph and I can rename this, I'm just going to call this macro variations. So this looks much cleaner now. Now I can just get rid of this comment box, just like so. And now I can do the same thing for my coordinates as well. I'm just going to select all of them and just click on collapse nodes. And I can rename this to UV adjustments. Now if I go over here, I can see that my size A is connected to my output 1 and my size B is connected to output 2, and my alpha map size controls are connected to output 3. So what I can do is just click on this output node, and if I go over to my details panel, you're going to see that there is a readout pin option. If we expand that, you're going to see that you can rename all of these output nodes. So I'm just going to rename them accordingly. I'm just going to call them size A, this is size B, and this is size alpha. Now if I hit save and go to my material graph, you're going to see this is renamed accordingly. And now I can do the same thing for my tint as well. I'm just going to select all of these and then right click and collapse nodes, and I'm just going to call this color adjustments. Now if I go over to my node, you can see that my tint 1 is going to output 1 and my tint 2 is going to output 2. So what I can do is rename this to tint 1 and this to tint 2. And for my input, if I go over to my material graph, you can see this is connected to albedo and this is connected to albedo 2. So I'm just going to rename them accordingly. Let's call this albedo 1, albedo 2. Now if I go over to my material graph again, you can see this is now renamed properly. Okay, now I can do the same thing for the lerp as well. I'm just going to click on all the lerps that I have and just going to right click and collapse nodes. And if I open this, you're going to see there is a bunch of inputs and outputs. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename the output first. So the first output should correspond to the albedo lerp. I'm just going to call this albedo lerp, and the second one should be roughness lerp, and the third one is, you can see this is our normal lerp. So after doing that, we're going to want to rename our inputs as well. So I'm just going to rename them accordingly. I'm just going to call this albedo A, then albedo B, and then I'm just going to call this albedo alpha. And same thing for the roughness. I'm just going to call this roughness A, and call this roughness B, call this roughness alpha. Same thing goes for the normal. Call this normal A, call this normal B, and call this normal alpha. Now if I hit save and go over to my material graph, you're going to see this is renamed accordingly, and I'm just going to call this Lerp. So let's just reorganize things. So now you can see our material graph is much cleaner now. So now if I go over to my material instance, we're going to see that all of our options are scattered everywhere. This is not properly organized. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to group them accordingly so it looks much cleaner. So if I go over to my material and grab all of my textures for A, just like so, and then I'm going to group them texture A, and for the B, I'm just going to group them into texture B. So if I hit save and go over to my instance, you're going to see they're properly grouped under texture A and texture B. And let's do the same thing for our tint as well. So if I go into my color adjustments, so you can see we have a tint parameters. So I'm just going to group this to texture A and this to texture B. So you can see we now have proper adjustments in the respective groups. And let's do the same thing for the size as well. If I go over to my material graph and open up UV adjustments, now in here, if I select size A, I can group this to texture A, and for the size B, I can group this to texture B. And hit save. If I go over to my material instance, you can see they're all grouped to their respective groups. Now we want to group our alpha and our macro variation sizes together. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to my material graph and open up my macro variation. And in here, I'm just going to select all three and group this and call this macro and alpha size. Now if I go over here, you're going to see that this is grouped under macro and alpha size, and we also want this size alpha to be inside this. So if I go over to my material graph and go over to the UV adjustments, and if I select this and change this to macro and alpha size, you're going to see that everything is now grouped accordingly. Now if we go back to our scene, you're going to notice that our scene still looks bland and empty. So we want to fill this up with small objects like stones and rocks and sticks. So in order to achieve that, what you can do is you can go over to the foliage mode over here, just like so, and you can drop your foliage assets here. And for the foliage, you can go over to Pixel Bridge and go to 3D assets. So I'm just going to use this pack for now, this small stones pack. So once you're done adding the stones to your project, what you can do is grab all of these stones, just like so, and drag and drop them here. Now you're going to see that every one of these stones are checked on. So that means Unreal is going to use all of these assets to paint your landscape. So if I start painting, you're going to notice that the density is way too much. We don't want that. So I'm just going to hit shift and erase everything. And I'm just going to change my paint density to something like 0.1. So now if I paint this, It still looks a bit too much. What I can do is I can again change my paint density to 0.05. Now if I start painting, now this looks okay. So now I can spend hours trying to paint my entire landscape, but that is a very tedious process. But there is a way to automate this using our landscape. So I'm just going to show you how you can do exactly that. So I'm just going to get rid of all of my foliage. So I'm just going to search for something called landscape grass output. Alright, so after bringing this in, you're going to notice that there is an option to add grass types. So if I expand this, so you're going to see there is an option to add grass types over here. Now if I click on here, I don't have anything to add here. So let's create a grass type. And also don't worry, you can use grass or different kind of foliages over here, and you can just change the name over here. I'm just going to call this stones, I guess. Yeah. So this is not just only for stones or grass. You can use any type of static meshes in here. So if I open up my content browser and right click and go over to foliage, I can see there is a landscape grass type. I'm just going to click on it, and this is going to bring in a landscape grass type. I'm just going to call this f_stones. Now if I open this up, you're going to see that there is an option to add grass varieties. So if I click on it, and this is going to bring in a index. If I expand this, you can see there is an option to add static meshes. So I'm just going to add in a cylinder for now. Now if I hit save and click on my landscape grass and bring in my stones just like so. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to connect this multiply to this grass landscape and hit save. You're going to see this option that this is building grass maps. So now you can see that our scene is populated with a bunch of cylinders. So if I go over here, this is just going to pop up just like so. Now we don't want cylinders in our scene, we want stones. So if I go over to my grass types and open this up, so now I'm just going to replace this with this stone and hit save, and this is going to reveal the grass map again. Now you can see we have a bunch of stones right here. Now we don't want this same stone repeating over and over again, so we can add variations to this. So in order to add variations, I'm just going to collapse this and add another area element, and I'm just going to choose another one of these stones, and same thing, I can do this and grab another stone, and you get the idea. You can do this like, you know, repeatedly. So now if I go back to my landscape, you're going to see that the density does not look right. So in order to fix the density, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to my index, and you can see there's an option to change the grass density. I'm just going to change this to somewhere around 60, and for the index 2 I'm just going to change it around somewhere like 80, and for the 3 I can change it to 30 and this to 50. Now if I go back and take a look, now we can see that our distribution looks okay. One thing to note is that all of our stones is scaled at the same value. So at default this is scaled to value of 1, but if we want, we can use a random variation. So if I go over to my stones and scroll all the way up, you can see in the index 0 there is an option for scaling. So the scaling is right now set to uniform, Now I want to change this to free. So you can see we have an option to change the X, Y, and the Z scale. So there's a minimum and there's a maximum. Let's change this up. So if I set the minimum to, let's say, 0.6 and the maximum to, let's say, 2, and same thing for the Y, 6 and 2, same goes here. And for the index one, I'm just going to do the same thing. Set this to 0.7 and set this to 1.5. Now if I hit save and go over to my landscape, you're going to see that the sizes are not uniform anymore. So now you're going to notice that our stones have a different color than our landscape. So in order to fix that, what we can do is we can head over to our Mega Scans 3D Asset folder, and we're going to see that there are two materials for our stones. So let's just click on one, and we're going to see there is an option to change the albedo tint. So I'm just going to enable that, and I'm just going to try and eyeball this. Save. Same thing for this one as well. I'm just going to enable the tint and click on here, and I'm just going to use the eyedropper tool until I see if one color matches. So I think this matches quite well. The burning could be a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag down the saturation to somewhere around here. Alright, this should work. Okay, I think this is it for the part 1 of this series. And if you like the video, hit like and make sure to subscribe, because I'm going to be making a part 2 of this series where I go over how you can use atmospherics to change the look and feel of the scene. So take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.